Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. Hand plane frog adjustment. I'm going to take you through the process of setting the frog on your plane. Now, in case you're not familiar with those terms, how do you adjust that gap where the shaving comes out and what value is it? We're going to cover the Bedrock style. We're going to cover the traditional Stanley, and we're also going to do a low angle block plane. Stay tuned. This will really help you with your hand planing. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. So, the throat, or this opening in the sole of the plane, if you look at it from this side, it actually will consist, when we have this set up ready to use, the most important part will be this edge where the arrow I've drawn and the actual blade. So the blade and the chip breaker combined are going to sit on the frog. By the way, that's 45 degrees, so with a beveled down plane, you're always planing the wood at 45 degrees. Now, of course, that opening closed a little bit when I added the plane in. I'll put the lever cap on. Now, here's the function of this gap. If you allow this edge of this square to act as that part of the plane where the arrow is, you have your blade, and they're positioned however far apart. But as you're planing along, and the grain happens to change direction, as the wood fiber starts to want to lift up, if this gap is small enough, this part of the plane, again where the arrow is, will function in a manner that it'll put pressure on that fiber and not allowing it to lift up while it's being cut. So in effect, you can actually plane against the grain without leaving a torn surface. Now, we'll cover that adjustment in another video. But the big question that remains is, for general work, where do you need to set that throat setting, and how do you do it? Okay, before we get into the actual adjustment of it, I want to show you the three different types of frogs, or frog adjustments, that you find on commonly used planes. I'll start with the easiest one first. So on a low angle plane, and the most common low angle plane you're going to deal with is going to be your block plane. Instead of a frog, you just have what I might call a frog surface. So that's that milled surface on the sole of the plane. Typically on a low angle, it's going to be 12 degrees. The blade is going to sit in there with the bevel on the top side. That's the difference. So if you're calculating at what angle are you planing, you have to factor in that 12-degree bedding surface and the 25-degree, which is typical of a primary bevel on the blade, plus any micro bevels you have. But in order to open or close the throat on this one, you simply have a toe plate down here. So you loosen that front knob, and this lever, I'll turn around this way so you can see it better. This lever moves that throat, or that toe plate, so that you can either close that throat down or leave it open, whatever the setting happens to be that you need. This is typically what you're going to buy today. This is the Bailey style adjuster. So if you take the lever cap off, I already removed the blade. Take these two screws out, and you can look. Now, actually, before I go any further, I want to show you the difference because it's quite dramatic. So this is the Bedrock style. Take the lever cap off. Take the blade and chip breaker out. Now you'll notice that instead of screws like they have on this one, these are actually pins, and you access them from the back side. So on this plane, or this style, and here's a number 5 jack, show you the same thing. There's just a single screw there, as it is over here on this one. On this style, there's actually 3 screws. You have that center one in the middle, and you have 2 on the outside. These are called frog retaining screws. So I'm going to loosen those, back them off a few turns. The center one is the one that you use to actually move the frog forward or back in both cases. This one happens to give you a lot more control. We'll make all this make sense by the time this is over, but I'm going to pull that out. So the first thing I want to show you is this. The primary function of a plane is to hold a blade at a fixed angle while it planes the wood and not allow it to vibrate. If it vibrates, we call that chatter, and it's going to really degrade the surface. So the better the fitting, the better the machining is, the better support that blade's going to be offered. And I might add, the thicker the blade. So if you look at the old style planes, look at how thin they were. Now we actually mic'd that, and that's somewhere around 75 thousandths of an inch. This one is 140 thousandths, almost double. Makes a huge difference. So here's what you have for contact surface. So you remember, we're trying to dampen any vibration. So here's the frog out of the, we'll call it the typical plane. And for contact surface, you have this one, and then since this is a broken surface over here, you have this one, and this one. Add it all up. And then if you contrast that to the Bedrock style, you have this big milled surface sitting on that big milled surface. So all available surface area is there to make sure that there is no vibration, or it's almost entirely eliminated. So on this particular plane, in order to make that adjustment, now I'm going to, instead of going through and putting this all back together, I'm going to use this one because it's the same style. If I want to close that throat, what I would do is come in here and loosen these two screws. Now you'll remember, the throat adjustment is actually an adjustment between that part of the sole where the arrow is and the blade. But in order to adjust this one, my blade has to be sitting here on the bench. I have to have access to these screws. Loosen them up slightly. Use that screw in the back. By turning that, it pushes the frog forward, or it can retract it, either way. But you get it where you think you want it. So it's pretty much a guessing game. At whatever point you think you're there, you go in and tighten those two screws down. Put your blade on the bottom, blade and chip breaker back in place. And you really can't tell until you've actually got everything squared away. That means put the lever cap back on. Check your adjustment, because depending on where the blade is, that's going to affect the opening. Get that so that the blade is just starting to poke itself out that gap, and then you can look. Well, if that's where you want it, fine, but there's a good chance if you're trying to get a real super fine adjustment that you're never going to get that on the first try. Now contrast that with this. I'm going to take a time to put this back together. I'm going to show you this while I have it apart. These are called frog retaining screws, and they're hardened, and you'll notice when I show you get that out of there, they're pointed on the end. Now, these frog retaining pins that go down through the frog have cone-shaped holes on the bottom side. These are hardened as well. So when it's put in place, they don't actually engage like that, what you might think. They actually engage just below center. So as you tighten this screw, that cone bears on the bottom of that cone-shaped hole, and it pulls that pin down firmly and holds it and locks it in place. But it also allows you to do that with everything in place. Let me show you. And by the way, there's little divots on the top of each pin so that when you put it in place, and by the way, when you put it in place, you want to make sure that that tab fits in that slot on the back of that screw. Set that in there. You want those holes to line up with those pins on the back side. I forgot to put this one back in. Put that in there. By the way, that's a milled opening, so when you put that in there, it prevents this thing from wiggling side to side. Now, as I was mentioning, those holes need to be lined up with those pins. So when you put this in place, you just look at those where those divots are. And you want those, as I'm standing here looking at it, you want those at 3 o'clock. Now I always like to keep my finger on there as I tighten up this screw, because you'll feel it engage and it'll right itself. Okay, now I'm going to put this all together and then we'll show you how the adjustment's made. Put my blade and chip breaker in. Blade's always on the bottom side. Make sure the yoke comes through and the lateral adjustment lever sits in there the way it should. Make sure that's laying flat on the face of the frog. Put your lever cap on. Now I'm going to adjust that blade. I want the blade parallel to the sole, and I'm doing that by sighting down here, and I can see the blade. It shows up right there as a really thin black line. Get that so it's just visible. I use my lateral adjustment lever to get it parallel to the sole. Now I can see my gap, and the gap is a lot wider than I want. So I would come in, I would loosen each of these frog retaining screws, about 1/8 of a turn, that's all it takes. Using the center screw, and you typically want a smaller screwdriver here because the tote or the rear handle's in the way of it. You have to access it from the side. But here's what you get to do. With everything in place, you simply start turning that and you watch the gap close. Now, you also have to remember this. That frog is sitting on a ramped surface, sloped surface. So as you move it forward, the blade is going to project. So I'm going to retract that. Again, if I have a very fine setting, I want that to be as accurate as possible. So I'm going to pull that blade back again so it's just barely projecting. Now I can still see that my gap might be wider than I want. I can go in there and close that down a little bit more. When I get it where I want it, I simply go in and I tighten each of the frog retaining screws, right and left. And then I can go ahead and get my final adjustment for the projection of the blade, getting it parallel to the sole. So as far as precision goes, this allows you to do it quickly and accurately. The old style plane takes a lot of trial and error. It might take you 10 times to actually get that set exactly where you want. I wouldn't exactly call that fun. It actually can be quite frustrating. I've spent a lot of the last 20 years traveling in many different locations teaching folks these aspects of hand planing, and I'm surprised at how few times I've actually found people that knew that function of the throat and its ability to prevent tear out. I'd be interested here in the comment section whether or not you already knew about this, or is this coming as a surprise to you? Well, in now closing this off by telling you where to set your plane for general purpose, know that the limiting factor with having the throat really tight is the amount of shaving that you can remove. If I'm in a situation where I've banded a piece of plywood, meaning I've glued solid lippings on a piece of plywood and now I have to flush them up, if I've got to remove a 32nd of an inch, I don't want to do it a half a thou at a time. So I want to be able to take a fairly heavy shaving. So for that reason, I would keep that opening. And again, I'm going in and loosening the two outside frog retaining screws. And I'm going to pull that frog back. Now, before I tighten it up, I'm going to go in here and get that blade so it's just starting to protrude. Okay, so there, that's about where I would leave my setting. If you can tell by that, if I'm guessing at it, I'd say it's probably somewhere around a 32nd of an inch. And I'm typically not going to pull shavings off that are more than a 32nd of an inch. So I would then tighten up the two frog retaining screws. And by the way, one of the things I like about this particular plane is that there's just enough movement between those two milled surfaces on either side that you can, as you're tightening this, you can just line it up so that that gap is parallel. That means when I do want to close it down tight, I can make it so it's uniform side to side. All right, now, I always like to fully retract the blade before I start planing. A little wax to reduce the friction just makes it so that my effort is spent pushing the blade through the wood instead of pushing the plane over the wood. And while I start planing, I like to spin the adjuster knob with my index finger on my right hand till I start to see where the shaving's coming out. It's on the right, so I need to make a little bit of an adjustment with the lateral adjustment. Try that again. Went too far, I'm a little heavy on the left, so I'll move it over. And now the shaving is coming out and it's pretty much staying right in line, so that's exactly where I would want it. Now, just for the sake of seeing how heavy of a shaving we can get, probably wouldn't have reason to have it heavier than that, but we still can with that setting, so we'll move it a little more. That's approaching, actually I got a pair of calipers here. Let me tell you what that is. So that's 5 thou. So that's just a little bit thicker than a sheet of paper. We'll do one more. This wood's expensive. And that one, which is more like cardstock, is coming out at 10 thou. And I typically am never going to have shaving that heavy. I try to get my lippings a little closer than that. But the flexibility of being able to open and close that throat, you know, in a 10, 15-second procedure is a huge advantage and a good reason to spend the money and get a Bedrock style plane. Love this stuff. If you like my method of work and my style of teaching, I suggest click on any one of these videos and it'll help take your woodworking to the next level. Now, I've always said, the better the tools, the easier it is to master this. If you click on that picture of the hand plane with the chisel, it'll take you to our website. You can see all of our tools, as well as our online offering and our in-person classes.